You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, we are continuing here, getting some great New York Post columnists and writers on with us. And I'm excited for the guy we have on today as a Giants fan.
As a Giants fan, you're definitely going to love him. As a Jets fan, I get to inquire about some news with him. Yes, we're going through all the New York Post employees. Hopefully, we end up working there real soon. But we have Giants longtime beat writer Paul Schwartz with us. Paul, good morning. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Well, you guys, I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And you guys, obviously, without really knowing too much about you, you guys have great taste. Going down the New York Post sports department, you guys know where to get plugged into. I'll tell you that much.
And I like your Captain America poster that you got on your door in the background. So evidently you have pretty great as well.
Yes, Steve Rogers and I are. Some people say I look like him. What do you think?
No? I see the resemblance. Yeah, absolutely.
You better get your glasses checked.
Might need a new prescription. Yeah.
Steve Rogers and I actually share a birthday.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, Captain America, 4th of July, of course. Right?
Makes sense.
Yep.
So, Paul, you've done something that in this day and age is kind of unheard of. You've been with the New York Post since 1994. Nowadays, it seems like people who are breaking into the industry every 4 or 5 years, they're either getting laid off, they got to move on. What do you attribute your longevity here to? And is it really just the Post? Because what I'm noticing is a lot of the Post writers, once they are in there, they don't leave. Or if they leave like Andrew Marchand, they end up coming back. So what is it that's so great about working for the Post that is enabling all the writers to have such longevity?
Well, I mean, this is something nobody knows. I'll break this on your podcast, is that the New York Post gave out Bobby Bonilla contracts to all of us like 25 years ago. Okay. So we're going to get paid every year, even after we retire. They can't get rid of us. No, you're right. I mean, look, the landscape of the business is way different now than it was when I broke in. But still, even when I broke in years and years ago, people moved around. They went from one newspaper to another. They covered, colleges. Then they went to do a professional beat somewhere else. Then they became a columnist somewhere else. This is much different now. But look, the New York Post, I think it's the best sports section in New York, and not because of me, just because we are very, very dedicated to sports. I always tell people I work for, the department on the back page, not the department on the front page. Take of that what you will. But we've always been dedicated to sports, and when we get good people, we keep them, for the most part. And, it's a good place to work for the most part. It's a job like any other job, but it's a good place to work for the most part. And people are not looking around too much to leave because they like what they have right there.
No doubt about it. And, it's New York City. You got access to all these great teams. So it's a top market. Why would you want to, go elsewhere? Now, let's take it back to the beginning here. We're going to work our way up to how you got to the Post. Take us back, your childhood. Were you a big football fan? What other sports did you like? And when did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in sports and journalism?
Well, my whole academic career, I was always a better writer than I was like math and sciences. If there was a course that I could write my way out of, I usually did. History, writing, English, things like that, I was better at. And I became a sports fan, pretty early, not too early. I remember early, my father, who was a big sports fan, they would say, well, Paul's really into science. He's not into math, not into sports so much, but loved dinosaurs more than I loved football players. Now being a football player, there's a football writer, there's a lot of similarities between those dinosaurs and some of the offensive linemen. But in high school, I was a sports editor of my high school paper on Long Island. I went to the university at Albany. I became the sports editor there. I wrote for the paper my freshman year. I was the sports editor by my sophomore year, covered really high-level Division III sports there. English major, journalism minor, pretty formulaic pathway, sort of. That's what I knew what I wanted to do. Got a job. I got an internship at the Albany Times-Union, which was a really good paper in the capital of New York, in Albany, my senior year in college. parlayed that into a job at the Times Union, worked there after I graduated. I was lucky. I signed up for a job several weeks before I graduated. So I didn't have any of that angst about, looking for a job after I graduated. Stayed in Albany, to get into the New York market. So I moved several years later to the Middletown Times-Herald Record, which is in Orange County. I didn't have to work in Orange County. They had at the time what was a New York correspondent. So they had a guy, because they're closer to New York than Albany was, they had a guy in New York just dedicated to covering New York sports, which is exactly what I wanted. So I moved home and I covered the Mets, the Knicks, and the Yankees during their seasons. It was tremendous. That got me into the New York market. From there, I made connections, and 4 years later or so, I got a job at the Post covering the New Jersey Nets at the time, who were very good. Derek Coleman, Kenny Anderson, the late Drazen Petrovic, the very bad Benoit Benjamin. They were these are guys before your times, but the Nets, and then they put me on the Giants beat, and I've been there ever since.
So first things first, to clarify for our listeners, are you a Giants fan or a Jets fan? As a Long Island guy,
I'm not a fan.
You're not a fan.
No. How can I be?
You covered both teams, but you are not a fan of either team.
Well, I can't be a fan now. I mean, I grew up really, this kind of sounds bogus. I grew up liking both football teams. I lived on Long Island. It was closer to where the Jets practice in Hofstra. Right. So I remember my father taking me to see Jets practices. I remember seeing Joe Namath in practice, watching him practice as a young kid. So the Jets were the more local team for me, certainly, than the Giants. But my father was a Giants fan. I guess you could say I was a Giants fan growing up, but once you're in the business, I mean, if you went to a college, you can certainly be a fan of your college, still be a professional. But, if I came to the Giants, if I came to the New York Post from Cleveland, right, and I was a Browns fan, I could still be a Browns fan and cover the Giants. I mean, as long as you can do that. But, I'm a New Yorker, and so I'm not, I'm a fan of a good story, and I'm a fan of a good Giants story. And, in 2007, it was a great Giants story. So if you're asking me, that playoff run, was I hoping the Giants would win? Yeah, because it was a great story. I had some colleagues who were hoping the Giants would lose in the playoffs because it was an easier story if they lost. I don't have to worry about the Giants anymore. I mean, I think it was a thrill to cover a team that made a Super Bowl run. It was a great story. Therefore, I was a fan of that story.
So, as a fan of many great stories, you seem like you're very old school, very old fashioned.
What do you mean by that?
You worked as a sports editor for your high school paper.
Okay.
You worked as a sports editor for your college paper, and then you eventually worked your way up. So, I think the more traditional way that people used to get into the business is the mindset, especially the one that I had when I was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And it was that early. I used to love writing myself. Is I want to be a sports writer. I want to try to write as much as I can. I worked at a college paper as well. I did sports writing, did everything for every sport. Was a sports editor too. When you were younger, did the newspapers of the city intrigue you? Did you read stuff like Newsday and the News and the Post? Were you very much into newspapers from a very early age? Because it seems like the writers that we have on, all of them are following the same type of trajectory where they were newspaper fans when they were younger. They had their favorite writers or their favorite teams that they followed when they were reading the papers when they were younger. So would you consider yourself in that kind of class of people?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, first of all, there were more newspapers in New York. Look, I'm an older guy in the business. There was no ESPN when I started. Okay. I mean, it's just the case. There was no WFAN when I started. So if you didn't read in the newspaper, you didn't know it. You didn't know it. If you got your sports, it was, a couple of little quickie sound bites on the radio, and it was the newspaper. So, yeah, I mean, my grandfather who lived downstairs liked the late stock market printing. So he got the New York Post. So I saw that. We got the Daily News. I shouldn't say that because they're a competitor, but we got the Daily News. And I remember reading the Daily News on Long Island. It was like the earlier edition. And I didn't know. I wasn't sophisticated. So I'd say, I wonder why their stories, their game stories are so kind of, this is just what happened. Not a lot of quotes in them. You know, they seem kind of perfunctory. And my father would come home from work with the Newsday, which he would get at work. And he would bring home Newsday. And I would read that. And I say, boy, this is a much more complete, accurate, thought out game story and column. So then I kind of realized, well, there's editions and, you know, Newsday was later, all this other stuff. So yeah, I read, you know, I remember vividly, my father would come home around 6:30 and he would bring the Newsday home and I would just sit at and start reading it. And, you know, my mother would say, okay, we have to have dinner now. Let's go. We're having dinner. And I'd be like, Paul, put the paper down. We're having dinner. So, you know, then after dinner, I would finish reading the paper. So, yeah, that's how and I had writers that I liked. I had writers that I looked at and said, man, this is really good. I could never write like this. And so, yeah, I tried to learn from what they were writing.
And now we live in a world today where the first edition or the late editions, that's no longer a concern because everything is digital now. Everything is instantaneous. I'm sure deadlines have become much tighter. Time period for getting stuff out, especially after games, is definitely much more prevalent now. I'm sure you've experienced situations.
Well, you know what?
Had your game story ready to go, and you must have had rewrites at the very last minute. How has the digital world changed what you guys have done at the Post?
Well, first of all, we're still an old school newspaper. So we have kind of two masters we have to serve. The newspaper, our newspaper still has very similar deadlines to 20 years ago. We have an early edition. We have, you know, a Metro edition. We have a late sports final. So my newspaper job is in some ways incredibly very similar. I have to write an early story. I write my newspaper story and sometimes I do a web story. They pick up the story that I write in the newspaper for the web. We have a whole web crew that writes web stories that are Giants related that I really don't have a part of. We're fortunate that way. So it's really, we're different. We're very dedicated to print newspaper and the print newspaper product. So that is, I wouldn't say my priority, but that is a priority, certainly, that I have newspaper deadlines that I have to hit every night that I'm covering a game and every day that I'm covering the Giants. Now, the website, of course, if John Mara has a press conference at 11 o'clock, you know, 20 years ago, I would listen to what John Mara said. I would get my thoughts together. I knew as long as I got my story in by 6:30 or 7 o'clock, that was all I needed to do. Obviously, that's, you know, a fantasy land for what we have now. I tweet the things he says. I post something right away on the website, what he says. I may have to come back and do multiple posts on the websites. Like I said, we have other people on our staff who will be posting things on the website. So, yeah, I mean, it's great for the consumer, but I firmly believe that this immediacy leads to great information and a lot of bogus information and a lot of people not processing what they hear, literally just hearing it, digesting, not even digesting it, hearing it and sending it out there with no thought and no contemplation. So it's good for a lot of things to disseminate news, but it's not great because it's disseminating half-baked news in a lot of ways.
So let's say you're in a scenario where you get a big scoop or, you know, you've been working on a story and now you come to the point where you got to really toe the line between, do I get this out on Twitter so I'm the first person to break this news, or do I get this written so that it goes to the New York Post? So how do you toe the line, and how does that discussion come about with the editors at the New York Post?
Well, good question. I mean, ideally, you want anything that you put out there to have a link. Okay. I mean, the odds of it being in the newspaper first is not impossible, but it can happen. You know, if you have something you really know, you have it alone. When I'm not going to tweet this out, we're not going to put this on the website, bang, we're going to put it in the newspaper, and then we're going to hit the digital thing. But that I have to admit is rare. So really, what I've been taught and told is the best thing to do is to do something that you can put a link to that can send people to nypost.com. Okay. And then we can kind of further the story. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you have to put something out on Twitter first and then quickly get something on, there's all, different formulas and different metrics that we use. Search engine optimization is very important. When people Google something, the New York Post story comes up first or close to first as possible. This stuff makes my ears bleed sometimes when I talk about it, because it's not what I was, taught. And
you're not
some
alone.
of it, and some of it I believe in. Obviously, it helps pay the bills, and some of it I don't believe in, and I have to do it anyway. Look, it's important to get scoops. Important to be first. But I just heard something the other day that 2% of the American population say they use Twitter regularly. Okay, so where some other people in the business, and certainly who cover the Giants, will kneel at the altar of Twitter.
Right.
I know it's important. I'm not an idiot. I know it's important, but I don't live and breathe it. And at the end of the day, I can put this down. I can put this down sometimes, where I know some people literally walk into the men's room at MetLife Stadium with this in hand and will be doing their business with one hand and looking at this in the other hand. And the day I do that is the day I need to retire.
Paul, has there ever been an instance where, you're not expecting major news or something, maybe you're out with the family, a barbecue or something, and then you're like, oh man, something happened, I gotta go write. So do you just travel around with your laptop or something, or how do you prepare yourself for the unknown situations that might pop up?
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, obviously that definitely happens. Well, just like I said, I don't want to take this into the bathroom. This is as good as any laptop, right? As far as giving me information, and also, I've written stories on my phone. I mean, it's not, I mean, some people only write on their phone. So I've certainly sat down in the corner and written stories on my phone. Is it desirable? No. Is it better? Just the whole process. Look, there's plenty of people in the business now who grew up with the cell phone in their hand. I mean, literally out of the womb, they've had their cell phone. Not literally, but figuratively. I did not. So I need to learn this. It's mental. It's a muscle memory, and I have it, but some people have it from an earlier age than I do. But sure, I mean, I take my laptop a lot of places. I don't take it everywhere. If I'm going to the movies, I don't take my laptop, but I have my phone with me at all times. Am I on it 24/7? No, but I'm never too far away from, and that is why, a lot of people, coaches, writers, anybody who is tied to it, must plug out at some point, must tune out at some point, or else you're never really alone. You're never really not working. So certainly there are times where I'm on vacation or I'm taking the day and I know someone else is covering me, where I either don't take my phone or I'm not checking my phone all the time. And I think that's just healthy.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. And now you're seeing kids that are not even a year old on their iPads. It's kind of scary to me, and I don't understand how that came to be. But you're just growing up with the iPad. Now, I wanted to know, for you, is it better for you to write stories when you have like consistent winning? The team is just status quo. Or is it better for you when there is a juicy story, there is potentially a scandal or maybe a firing? Which way is better or easier for you to write?
Here's the thing. If you want to, it's a good question. They're all easy and they're all hard and they're all interesting and they're all mundane and they're all challenging. Okay. Like if you say to someone, if someone asks me, I can't cover a bad team. I say, okay, go cover Oklahoma football. Go cover Alabama football, okay? And you'll have a nice run and they'll win 10, 11, 12 games every year. And eventually it'll slide, things like that. You get what you get. When my kids were in preschool, they used to come home and they used to say, the teacher told me you get what you get and you don't get upset, okay? Whether it's the red one or the green one or the yellow one or the blue one, whether it's blocks or something like that, you get what you get. So I've covered teams that are 3-13. I've covered teams that are 12-4. I covered teams I knew stunk and were not going to make the playoffs. I covered teams that I thought were very good and I was pretty sure they'd make the playoffs. And I covered everything in between. I covered teams I thought were really good and stunk, and I covered teams that stunk and they end up being really good. You take it all as it comes. Now, look, human nature is human nature. If you cover a team that's really good, by and large, the coaches, the players are going to be more upbeat, more positive. You will write more positive stories. Sometimes the access will be easier because you will say, look, I'd like to write a story about you and about your incredible touchdown streak. Okay. I'd like to write a story about you and the fact that you are the leader of the NFL's second best defense. These are things that people want to talk about. The team is lousy and losing, you can do some positive stories, but there's a lot of why didn't this go right? Why are you playing badly? Why did you make that decision in the fourth quarter to punt? It backfired on you. It's just human nature. That's the flow of it, the negative and positive. So, I cover what I cover and I try to do it honestly and as accurately as possible. Like I said before, 2007 was an unbelievable story. In 2000, I covered the Giants and they were a good team, much better than I thought. They played really well. They were the number 1 seed. They beat the Vikings 41-0 in the NFC Championship game. And then they laid a complete egg in the Super Bowl. And, 34-7 losing to the Ravens in the Super Bowl, that was a dead story. Now, was I, go Giants, they have to win the Super Bowl? No, but that was a dead story. There was nothing in there. It was just, they got their butts kicked. Ray Lewis killed them. They didn't have a chance. Everyone was upset, but it wasn't even a juicy story. It wasn't the Seahawks losing on a horrific interception. It was just a dead story. So, the Giants' 2 Super Bowl stories, although that I covered, that one were very difficult to write because they went down to the last second deadline, but they were tremendous stories to write, full of drama and things like that. So, you're going to get those stories sometimes if you're lucky enough to cover a team that is that good. And you're going to get to the 8-8. You're going to get teams. Look, I have to say, our clicks, our interest on the website increased during the Giants' 4-game winning streak. People want to read it. Okay, now they're in it. Now they could actually win this crazy NFC East. So that's good for business. I was covering football, and then in the off season, I covered the Knicks every off season years ago before you really had to concentrate. Now, when the season's over, you get a little break, cover playoffs, things like that. But there's always something in football. There's free agency. There's all kinds of things you have to write very quickly. The Combine, the Senior Bowl, everything comes at you quickly. Years ago, there was a real off season, and I used to cover, because I covered the Knicks at my former paper. They put me on the Knicks in, I would say, March, April, May, June. The Knicks are in the playoffs every year under Pat Riley and things like that. So for 4 months, I did a lot of Knicks stuff. And I remember in '94, the Knicks had a run to the finals. The Rangers had a run to the Stanley Cup. Our newspaper was selling out on the newsstand. Every day on the back page, it was either Knicks win, Rangers getting ready for game 6. Rangers win, Knicks getting ready for game 6. It was unbelievable in this city. And it really wasn't an internet thing there at all. It wasn't, but the newspapers, we printed them and people bought them. It was great. It was great for business. So when your teams are good, it's usually good for business.
Is there anything else over the years, because obviously you spent a quarter century at the Post, and that's just, outstanding in itself. Is there anything else over the years that sticks out to you? Maybe the Jets hiring Parcells, the Giants on draft day, the whole fiasco, ended up getting Eli Manning. I remember a couple of years ago when the Giants were making the playoffs, they had the party boat incident. Obviously, then everything, the fallout in McAdoo, that was incredibly controversial. Anything else stand out for you during your time period there? Maybe a time period that was very hectic, a time period that, even though it was crazy, was something that you loved. It's something that stands out to you in your memory.
Well, a lot, certainly. Like I said, I remember going back to my Knicks days as, a backup writer for the Knicks and covering, I went to every playoff game. I went to all, look, covering Knicks back then was different. You were going through June, you could cover all these playoff games and everything. And I remember the aura of Pat Riley was incredible. I remember I started buying and dressing better to go to the Garden because Pat Riley, he brought everybody this style to everybody. most everybody. And, so that the change that he brought was incredible to me. Tom Coughlin coming to the Giants was really like a tale of two Tom Coughlins in a lot of ways. When he came, he was not good with media at all. He was not great with his players. He didn't have initial success. The trade of Eli Manning was not an instant success. And, quite frankly, Tom Coughlin, after the 2006 season, could have been fired. He really could have been fired. They were not sold on him, and he needed to change. And so be a witness to that change and to see him really change. I mean, he really changed. He didn't get soft and cuddly, but he changed. I remember talking to Tom Coughlin once, and he could be really rough with us. He had no patience. He had no sense of what we did. He couldn't take it if someone asked him a question on a Monday and then on a Wednesday, the same question was brought up. And it'd be like, look, that's the deal, And I remember talking to him once. He was so bad. He was so frustrated when you would ask him injury questions. Is this guy going to play? And I understand all coaches feel that way, but football especially, it's an everyday thing. He didn't practice yesterday. Is he going to practice today? What's his status? And I remember talking to him once. Tom, let me ask you something. When you plan your practice, do you live and die, and are you incredibly interested on who is practicing and who isn't? And he said, of course, I have to plan the practice. And he said, okay, if you are, why can't we be? Why can't we be obsessed with who's practicing and who's not and who's playing? And he said, point taken, Paul. He changed. He realized that the working man is the working man no matter who you are, whether you're a sports writer or you're a head coach. So, his whole deal was very interesting to cover. Look, this year was a freak show. I cannot say I was, one of my goals in my life was to cover a football during a global pandemic. I hope I never have to do it again. This Zoom nonsense is, look, I call it nonsense, but without it, we couldn't do our job. So let's hope we don't have to do it next year, but it certainly was a tool that was very useful and needed. This was very challenging and very difficult for everybody, and that was rough. I would just say quickly, like I said, you know what, I'll leave you with this as far as memories. I think we always think that, boy, it used to be better, right? You read about, the shot heard around the world, the Dodgers and Giants, and the greatest game ever played with the Colts and the Giants, and all these great things of our past. Boy, it was so much better then, right? And I got to cover, I think, one of the greatest games in NFL history. Really, the Ice Bowl 2, the Giants at the Packers, minus 27 degrees, I think, overtime, frozen field. Tom Coughlin's face turning red. What we thought then was the last pass of Brett Favre's career. Turned out it wasn't. It was intercepted by Corey Webster. Lawrence Tynes, who I have to mention, I do a podcast with, Blue Rush Podcast, for all your listeners who are podcast fans. Blue Rush Podcast, Lawrence Tynes and I, two-time Super Bowl hero. I think it's the best Giants podcast out there. Him missing 2 field goals and then with a frozen foot kicking, a game-winning 47-yard field goal. I mean, that holds up to any game in NFL history. It does, as far as weather, Lambeau, drama, the game itself, the implications of Favre and the Super Bowl. And then the fact the Giants 2 weeks later ended up winning the Super Bowl in a historic upset of the undefeated Patriots even makes the story even better. So I can honestly say I covered one of the great games in NFL history. I chronicled it. And I remember after that game, just sitting there, and another colleague of mine, we kind of looked at each other in the press box. We were writing, it was a crazy to write. We just looked at each other, and we just looked at each other with this expression like, can you effing believe this?
Yeah.
And then we looked at each other for a second, pause. Okay, back to work. But that was nobody in the history of football can say they covered a more meaningful, better game, because that's what it was, and it's an honor to be there for something like that.
No doubt about it. And obviously, you're in the building for very well-known plays in Giants history. So I want to ask you the reaction in the press box, A, when Tyree makes the catch on his helmet, and then B, when Odell Beckham Jr. makes the catch down the sideline there. And then what was it like covering that post game? Because obviously the Giants lost the game. I felt at the time Odell said all the right things, but that obviously was a monumental play and part of his career.
I would the Manningham catch in there too from the second Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Because when he makes that catch, all of a sudden everybody's thinking it's deja vu all over again. So I'm sorry,
Well,
I just
yeah.
kind
No,
of
that's right. Well, they're all different. I mean, go from most recent to least recent. The Odell thing was in real time, right? Because the Eli catch was not then put on Twitter and put on Instagram, right away. Oh my God, he caught it. That wasn't the world then. So the Odell catch, you see, first of all, don't forget this was in Dallas, right? They have the biggest screen in the history of the world. They have video screens. So the game was in Dallas, right? That
was
game
it? Don't remember.
It wasn't MetLife.
was it MetLife?
Like
Yeah, no. It was a Sunday night game.
Sunday Night
Yeah.
Football. That's all.
I think
Yeah, it was a Sunday night game.
it was in Dallas, I think. So you have it on these massive screens. So as soon as you see, you don't see it in real time. Then you soon, oh my God, you say, boy, that might be the greatest catch I ever saw. And then very quickly you start seeing social media go crazy. You know what I mean? And so, okay, this is a big story. I mean, back in our office, they wrote something without me. Odell the old, Odell Beckham makes a catch that has, the internet breaks the internet, whatever. I wish someone would break the internet one day. Then we wouldn't have to, deal with some of the nonsense we do. The internet really doesn't break, right? Unless the Russians are trying to hack us. But that was different because then they ended up losing the game. So you have a locker room. When you go in the locker room, people are not happy. Odell could not, celebrate that catch like he normally would have. So that was a whole different thing. That was like a singular moment. The Tyree catch, nobody noticed it in real time. You can't see it. You're watching here where he is going to be sacked. And really, if you look back at it, my first thought was, why don't they blow the whistle? And the referee, afterwards said he was this close to blowing the whistle. That play might have never happened because the whistle, he might have blown it dead. So Eli Manning is not a very elusive quarterback. And I'm looking at it saying, why don't they blow the whistle? He is almost going to be set. He can't get out of this. Then he gets out of it. And then when he throws it down the field, I remember talking to Chris Snee about that. Chris Snee is a famous, all those pictures. Chris Snee is literally not blocking anybody. He's standing there. If you remember, the edges with David Deal and I think Kareem McKenzie got totally blown up on that play, which is why it messed up the whole play right away. And so they all came in. Sean O'Hara is kind of here, the center, and Chris Snee is a little further up. He doesn't go down the field, and Chris Snee's just not blocking anybody. He's just not doing anything. And, he likes to say, he gets a lot of ribbing for that. And he remembers saying when Eli get out and then he throws the ball, late and long is always a recipe for failure when you throw it, down the middle of the field. And Chris Snee said in his head, he throws, oh no, Eli, oh no, where are you throwing the ball? So I didn't see the helmet catch right away. Then you see the replay. But you know what? That was just, you frantically write it down and try to get a mental picture of what happened. And don't forget, that just, that was a 32-yard catch, but that wasn't a touchdown. You know what I mean? So you're still chronicling. I think after that, didn't Steve Smith have to make an incredible catch on the sideline to stop the clock? Then the Plaxico Burress was not, I mentioned that game 2 weeks ago in Green Bay. He was a freak in that game. He was so dominant. And then he hurts his knee, and he's a non-factor in that Super Bowl until that last play. So in real time, that was something you kind of wrote down, awed by. But okay, I'll think about this after the game. I can't, and even after the game, I mean, it was a part of my game story. But that game was so big, no one thing could be bigger than anything else almost. That had a life of its own afterwards, really.
So that I got to ask you about the next season, because to me, during the whole Coughlin era, that was one of the best teams. Arguably, everyone says it. They're probably going to repeat if Plaxico doesn't have an incident in the nightclub. What was it like covering that crazy story with Plaxico Burress?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree that don't forget the Giants in 2007 and certainly in 2011 were not a dominant team at all. No. But from the playoff run in 2007 to when Plaxico Burress shot himself, they were, I think, 15 or 16-1. So they were the best team in football from when the playoffs started till the next year. Well, this is a real-time question. I was that was Thanksgiving weekend. That was a Saturday, I think. That news came out after Thanksgiving that he had shot himself in a nightclub. accidentally. And I was driving home. My son was young. He was so young that he was not in the front seat of the car. He was in the back seat of the car. Okay. I mean, he wasn't a toddler. He was playing hockey. He was, ice hockey. And we were coming home from a tournament in Pennsylvania. Okay. There was a lot of traffic. We had just gotten on the New Jersey Turnpike, very far south. There was a lot of traffic. I'm in the front seat alone. He's in the back seat. And I get a call from my editor telling me about Plaxico Burress shooting himself. And I just kind of said, look, I'm not in the mood for this. Don't screw around with me now, or something like that. And then, can you find out? Can you find out? And all of a sudden it started becoming a reality. I pulled over, I looked over. I said, look, I got to get home. I can't do this at home. So I ended up getting home. Other people on the staff, kind of did the groundwork. I got home and then ended up writing it. And, that was a very difficult story because there were police involved. No one was coming out and just saying, oh, this is what happened. Hearsay, it was third party. A lot of elements, taking guns across state lines and all this other things. It was a mess. But that was an example of wrong place, wrong time for him, certainly. Being in New York with the stiffest gun laws in the country, and also wrong place, wrong time for me, because I was not just sitting home on my couch. I was sort of helpless driving home with my son in the back seat from a youth hockey tournament.
Craziest times. How surreal was it at Tom Coughlin's goodbye press conference? And what was the mood in the room, especially when Coughlin finishes and he walks right by Mr. Mara, and that was like the ending image for the Coughlin era.
Well, my enduring image of that was I was sitting, they had, I think, first 2 or 3 rows blocked off for family and friends and things like that. Usually this is not what happens when a guy gets fired. You know what I mean? Usually gets fired, and maybe he has a press conference or a conference call, but it's not this. I mean, it was, everyone's wearing their suits. It was like a farewell, but literally didn't want to go. But they had the first couple of rows blocked off, and I was in like one of the first rows. I got there early, like maybe the 4th or 5th row in the big auditorium where the Giants are. And so Ian Manning was sitting like a row ahead of me, like right to my left, and some other teammates. I think Rich Seubert was there, maybe some of the other offensive linemen. So my enduring image of that is when Tom Coughlin was up there and he was saying about, the team and about Eli, and he how he loves Eli like a son. And he said, Eli thinks this is his fault. Eli thinks it's him. And he said, it's not him. And he looked right down. And so I was kind of, I was sitting kind of right there. So, Tom Coughlin wasn't looking at me, but he was looking in my direction. Eli was tearing up. I mean, he literally was in tears, and he's sitting there and he's looking straight. He's tearing up. And Tom Coughlin said, Eli thinks it's him. It's not him. And he looked at Eli and said, Eli, it's not you. You're not at fault, it's not you. And that was very powerful to me, you know what I mean? Because this was a real drama being played out. The quarterback, 2 Super Bowl time MVP, the coach, 2-time Super Bowl winner. Things did not go well. Tom Coughlin's leaving. It was controversial. So that was me more. So look, when he got off the stage, I noticed it. I don't know if I realized it first. Tom Coughlin was very brusque, and Tom Coughlin later had said, "Look, I didn't deliberately not shake John Mara's hand. I went up there. I knew what I had to say. I was very focused, and I said, get the hell out of there and get off there." Believe that if you will. I mean, we weren't going to embrace the man just fired him. Right. So certainly there was some tension there, certainly, but my greatest memory was seeing Eli there and seeing Tom Coughlin and that bond. I mean, that was the definition of a bond between player and coach.
What are some other press conferences that come to mind for you, covering obviously Eli's goodbye, a bunch of introductory press conferences? I remember everyone was making notes about McAdoo's suit and just wild things like that. But what other press conferences stand out to you?
Well, Tom Coughlin stood out to me. I was not impressed. I thought he was, General Tom, whatever. I thought he was too gung-ho. I remember he said about the guy he replaced, Jim Fossil, who at the end of Jim Fossil's reign in 2004, there were a lot of injuries. It happens a lot with these teams when they're bad. The coach is going to be out. Guys like, make business decisions. And they say, well, I'm going to play. I may not play. Actually benched. They didn't bench, but Kerry Collins could have played down the stretch there. He had an ankle sprain. They just said, Kerry, don't play. And, so all fell apart down the stretch there. And Tom Coughlin got up there and said, injuries are a mindset, and we can overcome that. And I know Jim Fossil was upset by that. And I'm thinking, is this guy saying that, you can coach out of injuries, and then the next year he had a bunch of injuries. And so, I was not impressed with him in the beginning, but he was, too crazed. And, I know the Giants at his introductory interview with them were not impressed with him either, because he came with this, manifesto, and they're like, whoa, we'll ask the questions. You don't have to, you can save your speech. So that was interesting. The McAdoo suit thing, I noticed it, but he was kind of that kind of guy anyway. I think that was more of people watching on TV, and then I was getting, texts from office and think, what the hell's going on with his suit? And I was like, I was kind of interested in what he was saying. Not his suit. We knew Ben. He was the offensive coordinator. It's not like he was a new guy. And I didn't think it was a big deal. Okay, he was wearing a suit that's a little big. He didn't know he was getting the job. He's kind of a country bumpkin, if you will. Okay. And that's something that became internet story. Okay. That was a Twitter internet story. I thought was kind of meaningless, but became a story because so many people were interacting on social media about it. Okay, this is a story because a lot of people are talking about it, not necessarily because it was important. The Joe Judge press conference was very impressive. It was, I think everyone was very much on alert. Pat Shermer 2 years ago had a press conference. It wasn't very exciting, but it was, he seemed very mature. He didn't win press conference, but he didn't lose it. And so everyone was kind of on alert, let's see what this guy has. Nobody knew who he was. He was 38 years old. I did not think he was a favorite for the job. The Giants did not think he was a favorite for the job. Anyone who says, oh, Paul, why didn't you write more about Joe Judge as a candidate? The Giants interviewed him. That means he's a candidate. But, John Mara admitted, I didn't know much about Joe Judge. And, I did not go into that interview with him thinking that he was going to get the job. I didn't know. Matt Rule was still, high on their list. If Matt Rule had come to the Giants after the Carolina, I think Matt Rule probably would have been the coach. But once they heard Joe Judge, they said, look, we're not going to fool around with Matt Rule. They could offer him a lot of money in Carolina. We love what we heard from Joe Judge. And, look, they certainly took a big risk with it. It was not a popular choice. It was a big risk. That press conference was pretty meaningful. There's a lot of them. I remember, press conferences when John Mara and Jerry Reese had to explain why Josh Brown, who was was abusing his wife, why he was still on the team, and then why they cut him. That was a very uneasy press conference, asking very uneasy questions of guys who, kept a guy on their roster too long, for very serious issues. I remember going way back in a press conference, when I was covering the Jets. I was covering a pretty nondescript, they're all nondescript preseason game. And in the game, Dennis Byrd, a really good young defensive end, ended his career by getting paralyzed. Friendly fire. Scott Mercereau and Dennis Byrd were coming from opposite sides to sack Dave Craig, the quarterback. Dave Craig stepped up. They slammed into each other. And Dennis Byrd never played again. And at the time, people thought he would never walk again. And so you're covering you're writing, it's going to be an easy story, whatever. The Jets look good, the Jets look bad, a preseason game, and all of a sudden you're in a press conference and people are talking about, C5, C7 vertebrae and steroids, and we're hoping for the best, rush to a hospital, and, paralysis.
Wow.
First of all, that really teaches you better be on your toes. People will say, oh, isn't it all the same old? No, you can be, in a flash, you can be, embroiled in something you never thought you would have been, as far as what you're writing about. And then, that was a press conference. It was very sobering. Thank God he did end up walking, never playing again, but walking.
Were you in MSG when the Knicks were playing and the whole O.J. Simpson thing was going on?
I was covering a playoff game. Back then, they banished the media to the upper upper, rafters. We were sitting right at courtside. I was sitting right on the baseline, okay, at Madison Square Garden. There was nobody in front of me. Press row on the baseline, watching that game. We had small TV monitors that had the game on. And then, if you remember, the TV broadcast switched to OJ. This was game 5 of the finals against the Rockets, if I remember correctly. And so, you're hearing what's going on. I'm watching the game and thinking, how could they, I didn't realize the magnitude of the situation, that there was a slow, white Bronco chase going on. I'm focused on covering the finals. I mean, this is incredible. I'm covering the finals here. And they put it on the small TVs. They had that slow white Bronco chase. And so fans, you get to know the fans, because a lot of the season ticket holders I'd sit in that seat very often. And a lot of the same season ticket holders would be sitting there. You get to know them, you'd BS with them. And so they were coming. And so there was a small little group of fans kind of looking over at our monitor, watching this slow Bronco chase. And I'm trying to watch the game and I'm distracted. It was very surreal. It was very surreal because you got the sense that 19,500 people in this building are watching this game and living and dying with this game. And a lot of other people outside are now consumed by something very bizarre and very different. Very strange.
Wild. You mentioned Jim Fossil. I was always surprised that he never got another opportunity to be a head coach. Just want to get your take on what happened with him, post his Giants coaching tenure.
Well, he was 7 years with the Giants. I think they were in the playoffs 3 times, finished with a winning record. Yeah, I mean, Jim Fossil then, I think some of the stuff afterwards, he went to, his good friend was coaching the Ravens. And so he went to become like an offensive consultant for them, and kind of didn't work out. It just didn't work out. There was some rumors that maybe he wasn't working hard enough. So I think his post-Giants career was not really that impressive in a lot of people's minds. Yeah, I mean, he deserved certainly. I think also Jim was very discerning with his jobs. He didn't want to work his way back up to the quarterback's coach. He coached the team to a Super Bowl. I felt he thought he should go right into a head coaching job. I don't think he really wanted to be an offensive coordinator. Yeah, his post-Giant stuff really didn't go well.
Yeah, wild that the 2 coaches from that Super Bowl both never got another head coaching job, him and Brian Billick.
Yeah, and Brian Billick was, ended up becoming friends with him. They were buddies, and he hired him, and it didn't work out. Yeah, Brian Billick. Brian Billick was an offensive guru, right? That's what he's known for. That's how he got the job. And his offense wasn't great at all. And he won a Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer with a historic defense. People looked at that and said it was more about the defense of the Ravens than the offense, which is certainly true. And that stuck to Brian Billick.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what did him in was he was just never able to find a true quarterback. And that's become, I think, increasingly easier for a lot of people. I wanted to ask you on the topic of quarterbacks, Manning, and what happened with Ben McAdoo and his decision to go with Geno Smith and that historic streak. What was it like covering that? You're more than welcome to give your personal opinions, because I know a lot of people have some scathing personal opinions when it came to that decision. I think a lot of people felt it was very disrespectful to Eli. I, as a Jets fan, can acknowledge that as well. I didn't think there was anything even remotely smart about that decision. I never thought it made any sense. I think it was just kind of just this sporadic thing. I still don't get the logic today. What was it like covering that?
Well, there's a backstory to that, and it did make sense in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of people just paint Ben McAdoo as a nut job for doing that and disrespectful. Look, Ben McAdoo came in. He was the offensive coordinator for 2 years. He helped resurrect Eli's career. Eli had a very good year. He was a much better quarterback under Ben McAdoo than he had been the previous few years. Then he became the head coach. Ben McAdoo knew that Eli was on the decline. Okay, Ben McAdoo loved Patrick Mahomes and wanted him to draft Patrick Mahomes. And they didn't. The Giants were not looking for a quarterback there. And don't forget, it's easy to say now. Now you can have, hundreds of guys say, oh, I love Patrick Mahomes. There weren't a ton of guys who loved Patrick Mahomes then. They did not. Some guys did, but look how late he lasted in the draft. A lot of people passed on, might be one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. So that's one point. McAdoo knew that Eli was on a decline, and they had to do, if they're going to stick with him, They needed to do everything they could to support around, right, with the offensive line and things like that. Now, during that season, the team was going downhill fast. Ownership went to Ben McAdoo and said, we're going to need to start playing some of the other quarterbacks on our roster. Okay, they had Geno Smith and they had Davis Webb, who they drafted in the 3rd round. Are you preparing these guys to play at some point? And Ben said, yes. Yes, I am. I'm preparing them to play. So ownership told Ben, we can't just say, forget it. Eli's our quarterback. We need to start seeing what we have on this roster. Okay. So as the season gets late, McAdoo says, you know what? I need to play Geno here. Now Ben's miscalculation was he didn't realize or ignored the fact that Geno Smith was a loathed figure in New York because Jets fans hated him. And Giants fans said, Geno Smith is a Jets bum. What is he doing on our team, right? Backup maybe, but he's a Jets bum. He can never play for us. So Ben McAdoo looks and says, they're going to play the Raiders. Okay. And he says, you know what? Eli's going to get killed. He plays. The Raiders have a great pass rush. So he says, look, Eli has a starting streak of 210 straight games. Goes to Eli and says, here's what I want to do. You're going to start. You're going to play the first half, but I am going to play Geno in the second half. Okay. I'm going to play Geno. If you're winning 10-0, if you're winning 30-0, if we're losing, I need to get Geno in the game. Okay. Ownership wants us. We need to get Geno in the game. Eli said, I don't like the sound of that, but I'll sleep on it. He slept on it. And the next morning told Ben McAdoo, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want streak to Eli's ego was bruised, obviously, and said, I don't want to be a part of a streak if we're going to just take me out. If I'm playing well, you're going to take me out of the game. So Eli said, I don't want a part of that. So Ben said, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay. And Geno's starting. Geno's going to start. So Eli didn't necessarily bench himself. Eli could have kept his streak alive for the rest of that season. Okay. But this is the way it went down. Geno played. They lost. Geno played okay. Threw an interception late. He played no better or worse than Eli would have probably. They lost. All hell broke loose, and so I think the ownership was a little bit gutless there. The next day they say, okay, Ben's fired. Jerry Reese is fired, who helped us win 2 Super Bowls. The public outcry was tremendous. We got to fire him. Next day, okay, Steve Spagnuolo, defensive coordinator, is the interim head coach. Eli's back as the coach. Let's try to forget Geno Smith ever played and go from there. And can you say that the Giants hung on to Eli and too long? Sure you can. And did they not do enough to bolster everything around him? Sure you can say that. No question. I will say that. But the whole Ben McAdoo was insane for playing Geno Smith. There was more to it than that, and there were more fingerprints on that decision than just Ben McAdoo's.
Do you think the backlash would have not been as bad had Davis Webb started the game?
Good question. I think Giants fans would have thought, look, there were a lot of Giants fans who said, Eli can't play anymore. Eli can't play anymore. No one knew what the hell Davis Webb was, but he was a big, strong guy, and he had a lot of touchdowns in that air raid system, and he was a 3rd-round draft pick. So, yes, people more interested in seeing Davis Webb play than they were seeing Smith play. So now, I know for a fact that Ben McAdoo thought, Davis Webb is not ready to play here. I want to get Davis Webb in the game. But if you ask me, as Ben McAdoo, who is more ready to help us win next week, Geno Smith or Davis Webb? The answer was Geno Smith. Geno Smith was not the worst quarterback in NFL history. He was just hated by Jet fans because he got punched out. He was just a guy, but he had some ability. As it turns out, Davis Webb is hanging on practice squads, and no one thinks Davis Webb in the NFL right now can be an NFL quarterback. That was a bad draft pick to take him at number 3. He is probably not an NFL quarterback. He's just hanging on. Geno Smith at least had a small amount of success in the NFL. I mean, so yes, but the unknown was Davis Webb, and people said, let's see what Davis Webb can do. It turned out he probably couldn't have done very much. It turned out that Ben McAdoo was right, not starting Davis Webb then, but for survival instinct, Ben McAdoo could have said, screw it. Okay, people want Davis Webb, I'll play Davis Webb. Ben McAdoo, when they drafted Davis Webb, was not a Davis Webb guy. That was just a pick they made. It was not because Ben McAdoo said, I like this guy as a quarterback.
No doubt about it. Now, over your career, who have been your go-to guys to get quotes from or stories? Players, coaches, coordinators, front office execs. Who are the people that always treated you the best?
Well, it's funny. I used to have I was more of a basketball writer when I started covering the Jets. So I used to have a debate with the guys on the Jets beat way back when that they said Boomer Esiason, who was the quarterback then, who has gone on to do some things with his mouth, right, talking. They said Boomer is the greatest quote ever. And I had just come from covering Knicks, and I said, Doc Rivers is the best quote I've ever had. I mean, he was just a point guard for the Knicks, not the a coach and son, father of players and things like Doc Rivers' mom. We used to have a debate. I said, "Oh, Doc Rivers is better." They would say Boomer Esiason is. They were both damn good. I'm telling you, Boomer was a great quote. He was a great quote. The team stunk. You know what I mean? He was a great quote, and the teams were awful. If the teams were good, he would have been incredible. He was incredible. They were bad. And to see Boomer going into a broadcasting career was like, there was a 0% chance that wasn't going to happen. And I was 100% sure he was going to be either really good or great, which is what he is. Doc Rivers also was a good broadcaster, and he became a coach. I was 100% sure that was going to happen. So those guys were always great. Tiki Barber was a guy I always loved dealing with. I'm still close with him now. Giant fans go crazy about him for some stupid reason in my mind, because he said a couple of unkind and truthful things about Eli Manning and Tom Coughlin. When Tiki Barber said things about Tom Coughlin, right? Players on his team thanked him privately for saying things that they didn't have the stature or the guts to say publicly about Michael Strahan and Tom Coughlin. Michael Strahan despised Tom Coughlin his first few years, almost led an open rebellion against Tom Coughlin. Okay, because Michael Strahan could not deal with the 5 minutes early rule. He thought it was BS. Okay, he said, "You tell me what time you want me there, and I will be there when you want me there. If you want me there at 7 a.m., tell me that. I'll be there at 6:59. I will be there. I will never be late. But if you want me there at 7 a.m. and I'm not there at 6:55, don't tell me I'm late, because I'm not." Tom Coughlin had 5 minutes early rule. He said, that's you're treating us like babies here. So Strahan hated that and grew to admire and respect. They had to go through things. Tiki Barber was a guy I always really enjoyed dealing with. Justin Tuck was a guy I also really enjoyed dealing with. You know what it is? When you cover teams on guys that win Super Bowls, when I call those guys now from those Super Bowls for things, the vast majority of them return my calls and get back to me and like talking, not because it's me, but because, first of all, I'm asking them about pleasant memories, or they just were part of a winner, so they enjoy that. So, the Super Bowl guys, Eli Manning was very professional, perfunctory some ways. I had great respect for him, but he was not great to deal with as a media member. He was fine. Daniel Jones, the jury is very much out with him. They haven't done a lot of winning. I spent 1 year on Zoom with him, which is, not normal. Daniel Jones has a ways to go before he's Eli Manning, and, that says something.
Yeah, it's outstanding how many terrific future media members the Giants end up turning out. Obviously, Strahan has a monumental success on TV, both in the morning and doing the Fox pregame, postgame shows. Justin Tuck now is becoming much more influential out there. Tiki Barber hosts Tiki and Tierney. We had Brandon Tierney on a couple of episodes ago. So it just seems like the Giants know and understand how to handle the media, and they churn out media guys left and right. So we want to start wrapping up here. This has been a lot of fun. My last question to you is, and I tend to ask this question to a lot of the guests that we have on. I always like to ask about influential people in your life. This could be, professionally, at the Post, maybe in your personal life. So who are the people who are the most important in your life who have helped you get to where you are today?
Well, my father, who's 92 years old, thank God, in great shape, taught me a love of sports. And we used to watch games together. I would hear what he has to say. After every Giants game on my ride home, I call him, and he complains a lot when they lose, and he's happy when they win. And that's the kind of thing when they won Super Bowls. My son was young in 2007, but remembers it watching with his friends in 2011. So I'm thrilled for them. I'm thrilled for my brother and my son and my father when the teams that they root for. Me, it's my job. My father certainly in the business. There's been a bunch of people. Steve Serby, our great NFL and football columnist, a good friend, and he's one of a kind. He's certainly one of a kind. There's nobody like Steve Serby, and he's a great sounding board mentor. When I started the Post, a guy named Fred Kerber was covering the Knicks. Was helpful with me. He actually put in a good word for me to get to the New York Post. We're still friends. I actually just spoke to him the other day. He gave me a call. He's retired now. Always funny. He taught me probably the most valuable lesson back then any sports writer could ever learn, which was enroll in the Marriott Rewards program. Okay. And all these years later, I am a lifetime platinum Marriott Rewards member. So, I can stay in Marriott hotels for free with all my points. And that's because of the sage advice from Fred Kerber. So that's, if my one advice would be get in the frequent flyer programs and get in the Marriott programs and, hotel programs. And when this darn pandemic is over, we can start traveling again, start making your money work for you. That's what I would say. And now my son is a journalism major. He turns 22 this week. And so it's I have, now during winter break, he's a senior at Wisconsin. And like I said, journalism major. He's great. He's better than I was back then by a lot. And, I have a young journalism sports writer type guy who I can bounce things off of and ask him like technical questions like, this froze up, what do I do? Or how do I send this? So he knows all that stuff better than me, and I can get a younger person's take on a lot of the issues going around right now. So that's invaluable.
Well, tremendous stuff and great resource. We wish the best for your son. Obviously, Nick and I come from a sports communications and journalism background as well. Nick went to St. John's. I went to Marist. So we wish you and your family all the best there. We always give our guests the last words here. If there's anything else you would like to share or promote, go ahead. The floor is all yours. I know you've promoted the podcast already with Lawrence times before. You're more than welcome to do so. And if there's anything else that comes to your mind in these last few minutes, go right ahead, Paul. But we thank you for coming on. This was a lot of fun. We really, really hope to see you again. Would love to have you again. We hope you and the rest of your family have a healthy and happy New Year and stay safe throughout the rest of this pandemic.
No, I appreciate it, both you guys. You reached out to me. I didn't know you. You were determined to get me. You kept on emailing me. Sometimes I see an email. I may get to it 4 days later, especially it was during the season, whatever. So that determination is good. It will serve you well. You guys were prepared with the questions. Good. You improvised when you had to, was good. Just for anybody, people listen to it. They want to get in the business. It's crazy. I wouldn't, but all these people who say, why are you trying to get in the business? Don't do it. It's dead. You can't make it. I mean, bull, you know what I mean? Not everyone can, and maybe you guys will, and maybe you guys won't. Maybe my son will, maybe he won't, but communication skills are going to be important in anything you do. Being determined are going to be important in anything you do. Being professional are going to be important in anything you do. And so, you guys have done all that. So that's the first step. That's the first step is leave an impression with someone that, okay, I'll deal with those guys again. I'll deal with her again. I'll deal with him again. Good. Okay. Not, that blew me away. Just I'll deal with them again because they had their heads on straight. That's all you got to do, and then you got to be good. Then you got to be lucky. You got to do all those other things, have different ideas maybe, but that's the bottom line. I don't like people say, the business. Yeah, the business is a lot different. It's a lot different, but communication, man, look what's going on in our country. Communication is vital. Good communication is vital, and stupid communication is deadly. So, if you're on the side of good communication, it's going to serve you well. That's all I would say.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on. Absolute pleasure. And that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right. So for our very special guest, Paul Schwartz, for my co-host, Joe Calabrese, I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You know I'm right.